Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to the Institute for Personal Development, Kriya Yoga Ashram, where total consciousness is the new frontier.
Kriya Yoga is union of the individual with the divine. Join us as we explore the practices to initiate this process.
Good morning. Welcome to the Voice of Yoga. Let's talk consciousness. I am your hostess, Lisa Winton, and with me is Kenny Choi, also known as Swami Jayananda, founder of the Institute for Personal Development, located here in Hampton, New Hampshire. Good morning, Swami. Thank you for being here today. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing pretty good today. How about you?
Well, I'm doing great today, too. Thanks for asking. And we'd like to thank you all for tuning in. Today on the Voice of Yoga, we will talk about Christ as the saving aspect of truth, the interface which makes the divine creation comprehensive to human consciousness. In this show, we will discuss the symbolism of the magi, priests, and astrologers who find the baby Jesus lying in a manger. Listen as we set the table for what Jesus meant by, in John 9:3-5, I must work the works of him that sent me while it is day. The night cometh when no man can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. And winter solstice is the longest night. Welcome to the Voice of Yoga. We are talking consciousness. Join the Kriya Yoga Spiritual Advance to get the light in your soul and see with pure spiritual sense. Swami, I see the title of today's show is Preparation for the Birth of Christ. Couple of questions with this one. First of all, what do you mean by preparation?
Just about anything that you're going to do spiritually really is going to require some sort of procedure, that we don't just shoot from the hip here. We try and understand what it is that we're trying to accomplish, and then we try and understand, well, what are the strategies that can be in place in order for me to have a successful return.
So my next question is regarding the title, The Birth of Christ. Now, I have a funny feeling you're not talking about the actual Christ in a manger. You're actually talking about the Christ within us, Christ consciousness.
Yeah, in this show, what we are going to attempt to do is spiritualize Christmas, to take it out of the mortal sense of an event which took place 2022 years ago in Bethlehem into the eternal now of spiritual understanding. Spirit is not in time, nor is it in space. So for mortal sense, there's now and then, there's here and there. But for spirit, 5,000 years ago is now. 5,000 years from now is now. Alaska, Mars is there to mortal sense, but to spirit, Mars or Alaska is here and now. So we take this understanding of spiritual perception and we apply it to Christmas today. Spirit not being in time or in space is everywhere now. So we begin by bringing the birth of Christ from Bethlehem 2022 years ago to right here and right now. And we do this by reverse engineering the material symbols into a spiritual fact. And let's start with the Immaculate Conception of Mary and the acceptance of Joseph to be the provider and protector of the new life. Now, this can translate into the mind and body need to be purified and refined to be a hospitable environment for spiritual light. The manger may be a symbol of finding that place in consciousness that is outside the mortal everyday routine, not under the material laws.
So a couple of questions about what you just said to us, Swami. So what does it look like when we have a hospitable environment?
Divine mind is omnipresent. It's right here. It's right now. And it's basically looking for its counterpart in consciousness. if we continue to form thoughts and opinions based on information coming through our material senses, we create this veil. But in silence and in stillness, when we stop thinking, we now invite this divine truth, the divine idea, into our awareness. And then, of course, you have to understand the idea of purifying yourself physically, mentally, conceptually. To have a hospitable environment, to be receptive to the invisible, intangible omnipresence, you really have to be pure of heart. Say, for example, if we are inundated with unnecessary dependencies, if we're preoccupied with our personal sense of self, we create an interference pattern that does not allow us to be receptive to what is invisible and intangible.
Swami, could you take a moment and just explain to our listeners what we mean in Kriya Yoga by purification? What does that look like?
Yeah, purification is your first niyama, and we purify ourselves physically, which means we employ strategies like skillful use of thought, skillful use of breath, skillful use of water, skillful use of food, skillful use of exercise. All of this is employed so that we can start to educate thought up to spiritual apprehension. And again, like I said, if we do not purify ourselves and we're preoccupied, even something as simple as longing for a cup of coffee or a phone call or a text, these are all interferences that don't enable us to have attention for this omnipresent, invisible, intangible source.
So I have another curiosity. In the opening, I used the phrase magi, priests, and astrologers. I've never heard that phrase before, magi, priests. Could you maybe explain to us what that means?
Yeah, the magi, the ones that found Jesus, the baby Jesus in the manger, they were priests and astrologers. In fact, this was something Jayananda, my teacher at the Temple of Kriya Yoga, he started his seminary without walls. He was ordaining modern-day magi, yoga priests and astrologers. I really found that to be a metaphor for what it was that we were intended to do. Because the priest really is one who has dedicated his life to the service of this divine truth. And the astrologer is one who has an understanding of astrology as a spiritual science, which is a great tool to assist in developing a proper sense of the infinite by working with what appears in the material senses to determine what is held in consciousness. The thing I've always found interesting is the language of spirit is silence and the activity of spirit is stillness. Spirit is the changeless state of being, and so the fixed stars become the closest tangible image you will find to the idea of changeless, because the amount that they move over the hundreds and thousands of years is nominal, whereas just about everything else that appears on Earth or in space has this element of movement to it. So again, being a priest and one who has educated themselves to the forces of matter, mind, and spirit, and then also educating yourself with a system that gives logic, order, and predictability to what is visible and tangible.
So what is the lesson you'd like us to learn here about the Magi and the Christ?
What I like to do is I like to take all of the symbolism of the story, all of the imagery that you find in the story, and rather than assigning it to something out there, I turn it inward and I look at it, say for example, Mary, Joseph, the baby Jesus. These are all internal symbols that we have to understand. And the way that I work with that is Mary and Joseph, for me, are the mind-body complex. Mary is the feminine principle and represents everything that is visible and tangible. Joseph, to me, is the masculine principle and represents everything that is invisible but tangible. The whole realm of form and concept, mind, thinking, the mind-body complex. In order for us to be preparing ourselves for the birth of Christ, we must balance matter and mind. In the final analysis, you're going to find they're not there. There really is no matter and there is no human mind. But if we do not educate our thought up to it, if we're not faithful and orderly with the objects of sense, we will never be receptive to the deeper things of the divine principle. And this whole thing begins with the birth of Christ in consciousness. And for me, the magi represent methodology. The fact that they were priests and astrologers. The idea of a tried and true method, system, that we can find the Christ. In order for us to even start to do this, we must find the Christ. And in order to find the Christ, we must know what we're looking for. And one thing we know is we're not going to find the Christ outside of ourselves. We must turn within. And if we have skills like meditation or the prayer that Mary Baker Eddy taught, now you have a methodology that you can turn your attention inward. And we watch, we wait, we listen, and we let this divine truth begin to reveal itself to us. And we're going to learn that we can't find the Christ with the mind that we're using to get us through this lifetime. So we have to learn to think differently. And a good way to begin to think differently is to learn one of these symbolic languages: alchemy, astrology, mythology. Because Jesus taught with parables. Parables are symbolic languages. Fairy tale is another great symbolic language that you start to use these visible, tangible symbols that we can identify with our material senses to help us understand what is beyond material sense, what the material mind can never know. And then, of course, the idea of meditation. Meditation being the 7th stage of yoga, and the 5th stage of yoga being pratyahara, sense withdrawal. We're really learning to access this part of the mind that initially can only do one thing at a time. Then we learn we can do many things at once. And then eventually we learn how to think with divine mind, which is doing everything at once.
We're going to pause right here to hear a word from our sponsor, so listeners, we'll be back with you in just a few moments. Kriya Yoga Theory 2 is a unique and revolutionary practice and forum designed to facilitate the growth process in human development. Apotheosis is a real experience and has an evidence procedure. You cannot lead someone to permanent change by doing for them what they must do themselves. Personal accountability and responsibility are the foundation of Kriya Yoga Theory 2. You must be engaged and devoted. Prana power brings virtue to overcome fear, wisdom to overcome ignorance, purpose to overcome selfishness, enthusiasm to overcome laziness. Kriya Yoga is a path of action, knowledge, and devotion. These sessions are a celestial positioning system to guide the individual into union with the divine. For more information or to sign up for your next session online, go to www.ipdtransform.com. Namaste. Welcome back. For those who are just joining us, you're listening to The Voice of Yoga, and we are talking consciousness. So, Swami, a question for you. So, how do I know what I am calling Christ is the divine image and likeness?
Yeah, finding the Christ is probably the next step in preparation for the birth of Christ. And again, the symbolism of the magi, priests and astrologers. We may want to use a tried and true method to test this newfound concept of a spiritual child, the spirit within. And initially, you might start with a belief in divine truth, a belief in the divine creation. And then you're waiting on the Lord. You're waiting on the interface that is going to make the divine creation comprehensive to your consciousness. And in the meantime, what you really want to focus on are all of the things we look for or we count on at Christmas time. The peace, the love, the joy. You're looking for the divine qualities in everything that you're doing. And so that becomes your litmus test initially. And you develop belief in this glimmer of light within your own being. And as you start to work with this, and your belief in it will start to graduate to faith, where your belief now is starting to externalize. It's starting to have the effects you would expect from the Christ, whose message was to heal the sick, reform sinner, raise the dead, reveal the divine creation, the perfection of being.
Well, let's talk more about Christ, especially when he says, I am the light of the world, from John 9:3-5.
Yeah, I'll read John 9:2-5. And his disciples asked him, saying, Master, who did sin, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Neither hath this man sinned nor his parents, but that the works of God should be made manifest in him. I must work the works of him that sent me while it is day. The night cometh when no man can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. End of quote. Yeah, I really like this quote here, especially when he's talking about while it is day. I must work the works of him that sent me while it is day. Spiritually, it's important to understand that period of existence when we have a corporeal body, when we are in physical identity, is what is referred to as day. And then when Jesus says, the night cometh when no man can work. So it's a real clue here that we want to do this while we are in the physical form. And another thing that I find helpful here is the birth of Christ is around the winter solstice. Solstice is the longest night in the entire cycle of the year. It is when nighttime is the longest. And so during this period of the birth of Christ is closer to that period when no one can work. So you really want to nurture your initial inclinations toward this birth of Christ in your consciousness, that you don't want to just run right out and start healing the sick, reforming sinners, and raising the dead. You really have to cultivate it, nurture it as you would a newborn baby.
When he says at the end, as long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world, what does that symbolize for us?
Well, at this point, Jesus is revealing to his disciples that he is the Christ. He is the divine principle that makes the divine creation comprehensive to human consciousness. He's not speaking as Jesus the man, but he is speaking as that divine revelation of the one perfect divine life.
So, Swami, how did we as humanity become so far removed to the real meaning of the birth of Christ?
Well, I think one of the real clues you'll find is the idea of Herod during that period when Jesus was born. Herod could be the resistance of the world mind to the overturning of authority back to divine mind, making Herod the symbol of fear. We see fear as the defense mechanism for the false sense of authority as well as the false sense of life. And so when we have this glimmer of the belief in something that is invisible and intangible, omniscient, omnipresent, the world mind in us will resist us following that truth. And so without good leadership, most of us never really get out of being governed by that world mind. We're individualized by the world mind when we're in human form. We're hypnotized. And so we need to break that hypnosis. And when you have an understanding that it is the Christ that is going to give you the truth, and I liken this spiritual light illuminating your thought almost like building a fire. You don't strike a match and then throw a big log on it, but you have to find things that have a lower point of combustion. So you have some paper and then some small twigs, and you start to build a fire. And spiritual light, you must cultivate it. Another indicator of this, you notice Joseph had to take Mary and Jesus to Egypt because of what was going on with Herod in order to protect this Christ, this spiritual light, the truth of all being in its infantile state. And then as you begin to nurture it and develop it and feed it, it becomes stronger. As your consciousness starts to shift from material to astral mental, and then eventually to causal spiritual.
So we have a Christmas message here from The Heart of Mysticism by Joel Goldsmith, and this is from the December 1955 letter that he wrote. Would you read that for us?
Yeah. A Christmas message should be a message of peace. Our thoughts turn from the peace the world is seeking to the true peace, my peace, which, when men are ready to receive it, comes with healing of mind and body. The world seeks a peace that can never be found while its sense of peace is but an absence or cessation of war. This peace, even when accomplished, is temporary because it is based solely upon conferences and relationships between men and nations. True peace is achieved only as we lay down the armor of flesh, as we put up the sword of defense from the fears and hatreds of the world, as we cease warring with the conditions of earth. Lasting peace reigns only when men's relationship to man is based upon his relationship to God. Peace is realized as we find union with our fellow men through the experience of God. Peace is attained as we behold the Son of God ruling first our lives, then our neighbors. The world is seeking peace out there, but peace is to be found in entertaining the Prince of Peace within our own individual beings. Let us therefore no longer seek the peace the world is seeking, but rather the peace of God, which passes all understanding. Peace I leave with you, my peace I give unto you. Not as the world giveth, give I unto you. Let not your heart be troubled, neither let it be afraid. End of quote. Yeah, coming out of the false sense of a mortal self into the peace and the joy of immortal identity with nothing to fear, want, or remove because spirit is perfect and absolute. This peace includes all creation because it is omnipresent, omnipotent. And it's the only life there is. And as our identity begins to accept that as the only life I am, then you are experiencing the peace that he's talking about.
So when you're saying that spirit is perfect and absolute, and this peace includes all of creation, so I'm curious, which creation are we talking about? Are we talking about God's creation, or are we talking about the creation that we are conscious of?
Yeah, well, this is what we're talking about, is this outer world of sense, the human mental concept, the recreation, the false sense of life. That is dissolved when the truth of being is consciously perceived. The outer world of sense and the inner world of spirit become one. And in this oneness, there is no material mental concept. The only life there is spiritual reality. But we must be conscious of it in order to really come out of the belief in the false sense of life, which we're basically hypnotized by.
So, Swami, just like Joseph took Mary and Jesus to Egypt to protect the Christ, how should we interpret that with what we should be doing now?
Yeah, I interpret this as the way that we approach yoga, that initially in this process you must divide and conquer. So you really have to separate yourself from the false sense of self and begin to affirm your identity in what is invisible and intangible. As you shift from material identity to astral mental identity into the one body, then from there you can rise into spiritual identity. And the beauty of spiritual identity is there are no needs. There are no wants. There's nothing that ever must be added to, taken away. And the other thing is there's no opposites in spirit. So there's no resistance to anything. It's absolute goodness, eternal life, the changeless state of being. And in that truth, you rest and you let. And by giving up this personal sense of self, then you are now being governed by the divine law. You're under the government of the protection of divine principle.
Well, it's that time we need to close our show for the day, so listeners, be sure to visit the website www.ipdtransform.com. On the homepage, when you see the fading banner Blog Talk Radio, click it, directs you to its catalog page. Click the Products tab, the online classes, directs you to all the classes that Swami has available. Swami, any final thoughts about today's show?
Well, I would like to encourage people to join the Kriya Yoga Spiritual Advance, get the light in your soul, and see with pure spiritual sense. Namaste.
Thank you for listening to our program, The Voice of Yoga. This is Lisa Winton, along with Swami Jayananda, signing off. Have a wonderful Kriya Yoga kind of day. Namaste.